as was mentioned previously, there are two distinct types of cells within the nervous system that you should be aware of. The first would be the ones responsible for electrically exciting information and sending those nerve impulses all throughout the nervous system. The second group of cells within the nervous system are what are called the glial cells. Glial cells are sometimes referred to as the glue that holds the nervous system together. They are non-excitable cells that support and protect the neuron. And there are various examples that you should be aware of. So we're first going to go over the neuron structure. The neurons are going to vary quite a bit in shape, but most of them are going to have three main parts to them: a cell body, a dendrite, and an axon. The cell body, which is also called the perikaryon or the soma, is responsible for receiving, integrating, and sending nerve impulses away from it. So one way you can think of the cell body is it's almost like the central nervous system of the neuron. The next part of the neuron is called the dendrite, and it receives signals and transfers those signals to the cell body. The third part is the axon, which transmits nerve impulses away from the cell body and towards other cells. And there are specific parts of the axon to be aware of. One such part is what's called an axon collateral. These are simply branches off of the main axon. Terminal arborizations, which are extensions at the end of the axon and at the collateral. And finally, the synaptic knob, which is an expanded region at the tip of the arborization. So this slide is showing us a typical neuron, and we want to pay close attention not only to the diagram, but also the micrograph. So we're going to first start with the dendrites, and the dendrites are going to be responsible for receiving the input. So notice how the information goes in this direction and eventually leads to the cell body. So we could draw an arrow here, and all the information would be flowing in towards the cell body. On the micrograph to the right, we can see dendrites as well. The next part of the neuron, which has a nucleus and a nucleolus, is called the cell body or the soma. The cell body is responsible for integrating all of the incoming information and deciding what to do with it. Once it makes the decision, it sends information out of the cell body via the axon, and the axon takes the information away from the cell body. So notice the direction of this arrow is leading away from the cell body towards the synaptic knobs. And the synaptic knobs, terminal arborizations, and axon collaterals are all modifications of the axon. When we classify neurons, there are three different groups of neurons based on structure, and it depends on the number of processes that extend from the cell body. Essentially, a dendrite or an axon is what's called a cytoplasmic process. And if there's only one single short process like a T, it's called a unipolar neuron, which is essentially what we see here. It looks like there is one continuous axon here. There are dendrites, but they basically lead into an axon. In bipolar neurons are commonly seen in the special senses. There is one dendrite and one axon, the dendrite leading into the cell body and one axon leading out of the cell body. And then finally, the most common type of neuron has many dendrites and a single axon. So in this example, we can see a multipolar neuron with many dendrites, a cell body, and one axon. In this example, there are many more dendrites, but again, only one axon that leads out of that cell body. So neurons are classified not only by their structure, but also based on their function. The function is all due to the direction that the nerve impulse travels relative to the central nervous system. If information travels towards the central nervous system, they are called sensory or afferent neurons. If information is taken away from the central nervous system, they are called motor. So remember, towards means sensory or afferent, and away, efferent means away or motor. If, however, information, the function of the neurons is that they are association neurons, that they retrieve, process, and store information, they are called interneurons. So this slide is showing us examples of these classifications. What we're looking at here is a transverse section of the spinal cord, a part of the central nervous system. We can see the afferent input transmission taking information towards the central nervous system. So that means that it would be a sensory neuron. The interneurons are actually in the central nervous system, and they're sort of the decision makers. Then the motor neuron would be taking the information away from the central nervous system, and it would be responsible for output or the efferent. One particular thing I want you to notice is that all spinal nerves, and there are 31 pairs of them, these are the ones that go in and out of the spinal cord, they are considered mixed because they carry information from the central nervous system to effectors, as well as information from receptors to the central nervous system. So they contain sensory and motor information. So that's what the word mixed actually means. The other types of cells that we have in the nervous system are glial cells. And glial cells are found both in the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Unlike neurons, they're capable of mitosis, which is cell division. And some of the examples that you should know, first of all, in the central nervous system are the astrocytes. One thing they do is they help to form the blood-brain barrier. They help to regulate synaptic transmission and form a structural network and regulate tissue fluid composition. And you should be able to identify them on a diagram such as this. Also in the central nervous system, we see ependymal cells. These are ciliated cuboidal epithelium that line the ventricles of the brain and the central canal. And their main job is to help circulate cerebrospinal fluid. And again, any of the diagrams are fair games for the quizzes or exams. In the central nervous system, we also have microglial cells, which defend the body against pathogens. One of the important reasons for this is we actually don't have the immune system playing a role in the central nervous system. And finally, in the central nervous system is what's called an oligodendrocyte. And the most important thing that they do is they myelinate and insulate axons within central nervous system. The reason this is important is they produce a myelin sheath, and this allows the action potential of the impulse to spread much more quickly. In the peripheral nervous system, we find two types of glial cells. We see a satellite cell, which regulates fluid around the cell bodies in peripheral nervous system ganglia. And we also see what are called neurolemocytes or Schwann cells. And these form myelin around the peripheral nervous system axons, just like the oligodendrocytes do in the central nervous system.